Well, I'm looking out and I am thinking, go San Francisco Giants, because I'm seeing Giants colors out here. It's just we didn't plan it that way. It just happened to turn out that way. Everybody wearing Giants colors, which is somewhat ironic because you all know that the Unity Movement, our world headquarters, is in, well, it's not actually in Kansas City, it's in a suburb of Kansas City. Everybody at Unity Village right now, they are big Royals fans. In fact, so much that I saw that last week, they dyed the fountains blue at Unity Village, and they have many large fountains, and so it's a big deal. So yeah, it's a little bit of good-natured tension there, but that's perfectly okay. And we're the World Series and our 7-week Fall Series. It all just kind of goes together perfectly. This is week 3 of our Fall Series. We're working with this book called Finding Yourself in Transition, Using Life's Changes for Spiritual Awakening. And that's a pretty important line there, because we look at change as something to get through, and so often we approach change by trying to manipulate things in the outer world to make it more comfortable, when really going through transition is an inside job. It's a spiritual process, and that's what this book is teaching us. Now, we left off last week talking about how change begins with an ending. Sometimes an ending is really easy to spot. There's a pink slip on the desk, or we get served with divorce papers or something like that, or maybe it's something like this. Wouldn't it be great? Wouldn't it be great if every time there's an ending sneaking up on us, Porky Pig was around to let us know that the ending is upon us? Because isn't it true, a lot of times endings kind of sneak up on us. There's always warning signs, they're always there, but we don't always know what to look for. And there can be a price that we pay for not knowing what to look for. I think some of the most difficult situations in life are caused by staying in a situation long past the time when we should have moved on. For example, staying in a toxic work environment, I think, is a really good example. We hang on because we convince ourselves that the pain of the situation we know is far better and more comfortable than the pain of facing the unknown. We're willing to settle for the lesser of what we consider to be two evils, and this attitude is so much a part of the human condition that Henry David Thoreau, in this most quoted of quotes, said this. He said, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation." Now, most of the time, when you see that quote, that's about as far as it goes. And when we leave it at that, it seems a bit dark, a bit pessimistic, right? But you need to keep reading to the end of the paragraph where that comes from, where he says this. He says, "But it is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things." So, he's telling us that we don't have to be in that state of desperation. A wise person doesn't do desperate things. And who among us is wise? You know that song we sing, "It's in every one of us to be free." It's in every one of us to be wise. It's nothing magical. It's something we can all do. It starts with education, which is what this book and this series is all about. Robert tells us that endings have distinct stages, 4 of them, and if we know what to look for, we can be ready. We can be ready for an ending when it comes, maybe even proactive so we can see it coming and we don't stay around in a situation for longer than is healthy and wise. So the 4 stages of an ending: disengagement, disidentification, disenchantment, and disorientation. They all happen, not necessarily in this order, and sometimes with 2 or more happening at the same time that we have to juggle. So, starting with disengagement. Obviously, it's the opposite of engagement. And one definition of engage is to interlock with something. We become intricately interlocked with the people, the places, the roles, the activities that we do on a regular and even routine basis. And those are the things that become ingrained in us, to the point where sometimes we're not even aware of how deep that engagement actually goes until something happens to cause us to back off from it, to disengage. Sometimes the disengagement is the final stage in the ending process, and sometimes it accompanies each of the other stages. Sometimes we are in a process of checking out over a period of time, and we reach a point where we're really no longer engaged with what we're doing, but we're still in the midst of it. The ending hasn't come yet. I think a good example is what sometimes happens with a popular television series. You know how it works, right? For years, it's brilliant. Wins a whole bunch of Emmy Awards, gets great ratings, and then gradually the writers, well, they start to lose their creative juice. Basically, the actors start phoning in their roles and their lines, and the ratings start to dwindle, but the show just kind of sadly hangs on. And then there might be that last desperate gasp to recharge the ratings, but the truth is that it's the end. The disengagement is already complete. The result in TV land is something that they call jumping the shark. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before, jumping the shark. It's a reference to the show Happy Days, which I think everyone remembers. The show Happy Days was on for a long, long time, and by the time it reached the end of its run, disengagement had happened. It was totally out of gas. All the characters had changed. But in one last desperate attempt to raise the ratings, they did an episode where Fonzie, you remember Fonzie? Yeah. Fonzie, the motorcycle guy, all right, get this, the motorcycle guy takes a dare to jump over a shark pen on water skis. No kidding. That was the plot. I mean, and here's something you don't see every day. A guy in a leather jacket on water skis, right? And so he's going to jump over this shark pen, and you know, I think he made it, but who cares? I mean, really. The episode was so absurd that they coined the phrase jumping the shark, and it's been in our lexicon ever since. Jumping the shark, a desperate attempt to keep something going that's already over. And there's that word again, desperate. Desperation. And it doesn't have to be that way. You see, that's the whole point here. It doesn't have to be that way. Lots of TV shows choose to end their run so they don't end up jumping the shark. They want to end on a high note, end on top. It can be the same way in our lives, but it takes self-awareness. We have to do some reflection. We have to decide, are we truly engaged in what we're doing? Are we truly engaged in our work, our relationships, our organizations? And if we find that we're disengaged, it could be a sign of an ending that needs to happen or is going to happen, which then gives us a wonderful opportunity, when you think about it, an opportunity to go about it consciously instead of desperately. Sometimes it can take the form of an actual physical separation from the situation. Sometimes what we might do consciously is take some time apart, go on vacation, go on a retreat to get a handle on exactly where we are in this situation. External separation to provide time to work on internal separation. External separation to work on internal separation to see if that's what truly needs to happen, if an ending is what truly needs to happen or what is happening. And just a word of caution, disengagement doesn't automatically mean that there will be an ending. It's just a sign. It's a symptom. It's something to be aware of. Maybe we just need to recharge our batteries, so to speak, or do some restructuring in whatever it is that's going on. Sometimes relationships and careers need to end, and sometimes they can be rejuvenated. We just don't want it to reach the point where we have to resort to desperate measures. No jumping the shark. Okay, another phase in the ending process. Disidentification. Now, my word processor tells me that disidentification is not a word. But my experience tells me different. It tells me that it is real. At some level, every change involves the loss of something that we consider to be a part of our identity. And Robert puts it this way in the book. He says, much of our personal identity may be invested in the roles, activities, and relationships in which we are engaged. As such, we see ourselves reflected in those around us. When an ending shatters this outer mirror, it may feel as if part of us is missing, sometimes a very large part. Part of us is missing. That can be the cause of a lot of the grief that we experience during an ending. We've been talking about this. Grief is something that is normal. Grief is something we experience during an ending. So one of the ways that we can help to ease the difficulty of an ending is to get a handle. Am I cutting out a little bit here?
Yes, you are.
Looks like my battery's okay. I'm just going to move this up a little bit higher. See if that picks up a little bit better. Okay, so one of the problems we have is this human tendency to base our identity and self-worth on the roles, the labels, and things that are out in the external world around us. And those are the trappings of what we know to be the false self, the ego. The best way to see that happening is through something we've talked about earlier this month, mindfulness training. We talked about on the first Sunday of this month, I had a talk called Losing Yourself, learning how to see the false self that's created by the ego. That's the thing that likes to identify with all the stuff that goes on around us and use that as a mirror. So we learn to see it so we can learn how to deal with it in a healthy way instead of just letting it lurk in the background where it can break out and cause problems. Disidentification is inevitable, but it does not have to be wrenching. It doesn't have to be wrenching. So there's going to be grief. It doesn't have to be disabling. Grief is natural. We don't deny it away. And we especially don't try to find another external substitute for that which has changed and gone away. Once we lose something in the outer, we have a tendency to want to replace it with something else in the external right away. And I can tell you one of the best things that I did after I left the practice of law was to take 1.5 years off before I started ministerial school. It took most of that time to complete the disidentification process and to keep me from trying to substitute something for my lost role as a trial lawyer and try to substitute that and grab onto something else that I'm just using to create more of this mirror that is mirroring back to me something that's not real. And I had heard the horror stories about people who started ministerial school turning into basket cases by the end of the first year, stories of marriages failing, people on the verge of being released from the program, that kind of thing. That can happen when you're still in the midst of an ending, going through disidentification. You're disidentifying with the life you're leaving behind to go into your new life. And that's a rough thing to do when you're starting a new and demanding process. I saw it happen to people around me during school, and I know that I avoided the same fate by taking the time to adapt to the new reality instead of trying to just substitute something for what was gone. And I know, unfortunately, not everyone has the luxury in our culture of taking the time that we ought to take to deal with transitions. It's considered a luxury in our culture. The message in our culture is, get over it. Move on. Life is for the living, right? All that kind of stuff. I was able to take the time off, but I can tell you that there was some discomfort in the background of doing that. It was like, I really wasn't supposed to be doing that. That's the message of the culture, right? Hey, if you're not dead, if you're not disabled, if you're not over 60, you need to be producing, earning money all of the time. So I told that voice to take a hike. When an ending is approaching, we can be better prepared with the understanding that disidentification will happen, and that we might need to take some time to allow that phase to unfold naturally and consciously so that we don't glom onto something else as a substitute for whatever it is that we're disidentifying with. All right, a third phase during an ending is disenchantment. To be enchanted means to be under a spell, and in this case, the spell is cast by our dominant culture and peer group. And I have a bit of an aversion to magical thinking, so instead of maybe a spell, I like to look at it as programming. That might be easier to see for some of us. We get programmed by our culture and our peer group. And our programming can take two forms. Number one, beliefs that we hold on to without even being aware of them. They get so embedded in our subconscious, we don't even know that we have them. And the second kind are the beliefs that we're aware of, but we refuse to question or examine ever. Endings and transitions have a way of bringing that kind of stuff to the surface and forcing us to examine them. And I've said before that we can be in transition even when our personal lives, our relationships, our jobs, and those kind of things are stable. There can be transition going on all around us that can bring up the same kind of stuff. For example, marriage equality is now recognized in 32 states, compared to just 11 years ago, when the number was 0. Now, for some people, this is seen as an existential threat to their core values. That's a form of disenchantment. People are going through that around us. We need to be aware of the fact that that's happening to people around us. There's another form of disenchantment on the way. By the year 2040, people of white European heritage are going to be a minority group in this country. That's what they're telling us. That's going to cause a lot of problems for people who still believe that certain ethnic groups are inherently superior to others. So people are going through this. And maybe instead of being angry when we see reactionaries, we need to be a little more compassionate and understand that they're going through the disidentification, disenchantment, just like it is for us going through a change in jobs, a change in relationships and things like that. It affects us the same way. So if scenarios like this cause discomfort, it's an invitation for introspection. Disenchantment is an invitation for introspection. Any change can challenge our programming. And the question what we need to ask is, am I dealing with a core value that's under attack? Or is it just a personal or a cultural preference that's been programmed into me? That's a difficult question for a lot of people to ask, but it can be so liberating to realize that the foundations of the universe are not built upon our opinions and preferences. That can be a great relief. It can be very liberating. So finally, when you start to put it all together, disengagement, disidentification, disenchantment, you get disorientation. The feeling of being lost, miles from nowhere without a map, or I guess these days without a GPS. We start asking questions like, who am I? What is real? What is my life all about? What is my place in the world? And that, my friends, is the first step into the void, the great unknown, the wilderness, which is the second main phase of transition. Our familiar landmarks are gone, the street signs are gone. We have to start learning new ways to navigate. But what might that look like? This new way of mapping our destiny and feeling our way forward? That's where we'll pick up again next week. See you then. Thank you. Thank you.